A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hello, Herman and Corin. So I was building a news monitoring dashboard today for want of something to keep occupied with between these bursts of missiles, because it's so hard to take your mind off it living here in Jerusalem. And today they've just been kind of back to back. So the gaps aren't kind of long enough to do much else. So I've turned my attention towards finding out what's happening and how the world is reacting. And I was building a dashboard in X Pro. Those who remember when X was called Twitter, X Pro is basically what TweetDeck became, and it's now a paid-only product, but it's the same idea. And for breaking news, it's very hard in these conflicts to make sense of where to follow, because there is the news you'll see on the internet, on Times of Israel, for example, and then you've got the OSINT accounts that are often providing their own layer of information on X. Telegram is often a place where you'll find information that might be leaked even from official sources if they want to get out there before they acknowledge something. So it's often the synthesis of information that becomes the most useful. But when I was putting together these lists, I was trying to think what would be interesting to look at in the Iran-Israel conflict. And I began creating a couple of what you might call foundational lists. One was the government of Israel, the IDF, the Home Front Command, the Prime Minister's account, the official positions of the State of Israel as put out on social media. Another one was Jerusalem, because I'm living in Jerusalem, and it's a good way to quickly spot when launches are reported, what's happening in the city. So I have that up there as a search keyword. And the waves, the Iranians are calling these launches True Promise 4, and they're big into naming them incrementally. So by actually following that search and seeing when a new wave comes out, you get a kind of early heads up as to when they're planning their next attack. Usually comes a little bit before the waves. Then I was thinking of, following the Iranian media is an interesting exercise, because any regime like Iran or Russia or North Korea that is a bit kind of totalitarian in character and authoritarian and dictatorial, they often lean heavily into state-sponsored propaganda, and they often say very different things in their native language and when speaking to the world. So commonly you'll see that, Press TV, to take an example of an Iranian IRGC mouthpiece organization, will have accounts in Farsi and accounts in English, and you might see some subtle differences. They don't really hide their extremism, but sometimes the English one is a slightly glossed up veneer over the state propaganda that still aims to serve propagandistic purposes, but tries to be a little bit more oblique and tactful in how it does that, while the native language one is intended for an internal audience. And you'll often see more of that kind of chest-beating posturing to try to placate internal supporters. So my question really, Herman and Corin, is I would say there's an art in creating these. If you're trying to get an accurate sense of how governments are reacting to this, it's not quite as simple as saying, let's create a TweetDeck with CNN, Times of Israel, the keyword Iran is, the Iran-Israel hashtag. It's often when you get into the fine details of tweet dorking, where you use very specific keyword patterns and you create very deliberate lists intended to capture a segment of the dialogue, and that you'll find that you'll start to increase the signal to noise ratio, or at least form a deeper understanding of how the conflict is shifting. Because I think in open source intelligence, the value in monitoring these state channels is understanding that they're propagandistic, and a lot of the information is going to be fake news, and these days AI generated content for sure. But you get a sense for how the government posturing is altering, which might tell you something about their state of desperation in a war and how their messaging shifts. So Herman and Corin, I'm always looking to draw tips from others who love geeking out on geopolitical monitoring and open source intelligence, but also how the experts do it. I often wonder if one were to step into um, the news monitoring room of a foreign affairs department divided into different world desks, and if you looked at kind of the high level picture of someone, if they wanted to keep a very close eye on how the world is reacting, how might they divide the world into different regions? Would it be geographical according to certain blocks, looking for native language versus English messaging? Be interested to get your take on this important topic for those who are monitoring the situation, as it were, and looking to create the most effective monitoring dashboards.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my weird prompts. I am Korn, and I am sitting here in our living room in Jerusalem, where things have been, well, a little bit louder than usual lately. It is March 4th, 2026, and the sky over the Galilee has been glowing far too often this week.
Herman Poppleberry here, and yeah, louder is one way to put it. We have had a front row seat to some pretty intense developments over the last 48 hours. The sonic booms from the interceptions are rattling the windows as we speak.
It is definitely a strange time to be living here. Our housemate Daniel was actually just talking to us about this. He has been spending a lot of time in the other room building out these news monitoring dashboards on X Pro, what we used to call TweetDeck. He is trying to cut through the noise of the Iran-Israel conflict, especially with these new waves of attacks the Iranians are calling True Promise 4.
It is a great project, and it is honestly the only way to stay sane when the sirens are going off. You have to know what is actually happening versus what people are just shouting about on the internet. Daniel noticed something really interesting that I think is going to be the heart of our discussion today. He pointed out that state-sponsored media, especially from places like Iran or Russia, use completely different messaging in their native languages compared to what they put out on their English-facing accounts.
Right. It is like they are wearing two different masks depending on who they are talking to. So today we are going to dive into the architecture of information. How do the pros, the people in the high-level news monitoring rooms at foreign affairs departments or intelligence agencies, actually structure their dashboards? Do they go by geography, by language, or by geopolitical blocks? And how do we, as citizens or researchers, maintain a high signal-to-noise ratio in a world that feels like it is mostly noise?
This is such a vital topic because the way you structure your intake determines the reality you perceive. If you are only looking at English language accounts, you are getting the sanitized, PR-friendly version of a regime's intent. You are missing the raw internal red meat they are feeding their own populations. It is a form of audience segmentation that allows them to play both the victim and the conqueror simultaneously.
So let us start there, Herman. This linguistic dissonance. Daniel mentioned Press TV, which is the big Iranian English language outlet. If you look at their English feed, it is often framed in the language of international law or anti-colonialism. But if you look at the Farsi feeds, like IRNA or the IRGC-affiliated Telegram channels, it is much more apocalyptic, much more aggressive. Why the split?
It is a classic authoritarian survival strategy known as reflexive control. On the international stage, they want to look like rational actors. They use the vocabulary of the United Nations. They talk about sovereignty and retaliation under Article 51. They are trying to win over the so-called Global South and the anti-Western left in Europe and America, but internally, they have a different problem. They have to keep their hardline base energized. They have to project absolute strength and religious destiny to prevent internal dissent.
It is fascinating because it creates this trap for Western analysts who do not speak the native language. They see the English tweet and think, oh, they are looking for an off-ramp. But meanwhile, the Farsi broadcast is telling the people to prepare for a multi-generational war of annihilation.
And if you are building a dashboard like Daniel is doing, you have to account for that. If you do not have a column for translated native language sources, you are essentially reading the brochure instead of the internal memo. We touched on some of the technical ways to build these intelligence dashboards back in episode 706, but the linguistic layer is where the real intelligence lives today. In 2026, the gap between the English-facing facade and the domestic reality is wider than ever.
So if you are a professional in a news monitoring room, how do you actually lay this out? Do you have a desk for the Middle East, or do you have a desk for Farsi speakers?
Historically, it was always geographical. You had the Near East desk, the East Asia desk, and so on. But in the digital age, that has shifted toward what I call the geopolitical graph. We talked about this in episode 662. The world is less about borders and more about blocks and influence networks.
So instead of a Middle East dashboard, you might have an axis of resistance dashboard.
Precisely. In a modern monitoring room, you would have a column specifically for the Iranian Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and their affiliates. That would include accounts from Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, and the militias in Iraq. They all speak different dialects, they are in different countries, but they are all part of the same information ecosystem. Monitoring them as a single block gives you a much better sense of coordinated timing than just looking at Lebanon and Yemen separately. You start to see the patterns in how they synchronize their messaging before a strike.
That makes a lot of sense. It is about the intent rather than the location. But let us talk about the signal-to-noise problem Daniel mentioned. When a conflict like this kicks off, especially something like True Promise 4, the volume of information is overwhelming. You have thousands of OSINT, or open source intelligence, accounts. Some are great, some are just engagement farming. How do the pros filter that?
They use a tiered system. You start with your verified, authoritative sources. These are your government officials, your prime ministers, your military spokespeople. In Israel, that would be the IDF, or Israel Defense Forces, and the Home Front Command. That is your baseline truth, or at least the official truth.
But as Daniel noted, those sources are often the last to speak. They have to verify everything. If you want to know if a missile hit 5 minutes ago, the official account is useless.
Right. So the second tier is the trusted aggregators. These are people who have a track record of being right. They are often former intelligence officers or specialized journalists who know how to geolocate a video in seconds. The key here is to look for the consensus among 3 or 4 of these trusted accounts before you believe a report. If Aurora Intel, OSINT Technical, and a few others are all pointing to the same coordinate, it is likely real.
And then you have the third tier, which is the raw fire hose. This is where you see the telegram leaks and the cell phone videos from people on the ground. This is where the noise is highest, but it is also where the earliest signals appear. A professional dashboard usually has a way to sentiment analyze that fire hose. They are not reading every tweet. They are looking for spikes in specific keywords.
And this is where language becomes the ultimate filter. If you are monitoring the Iran-Israel conflict and you are only searching for the English word missile, you are missing 80% of the data. You need to be searching for the Farsi and Hebrew terms for launch, intercept, and siren. Even if you do not speak the language, you can set up your dashboard to flag those specific characters. When the Farsi word for success starts trending along with the Hebrew word for explosion, you know something has happened before the BBC or CNN even wakes up.
It is like a digital early warning system. I'm curious about the role of AI in this now. In early 2026, we have these large language models that can translate in real time with pretty incredible nuance. How does that change the game for someone like Daniel, building a home dashboard?
It is a total game changer. 2 years ago, if you wanted to monitor Farsi media, you either had to be fluent or rely on clunky Google Translate, which often missed the cultural context. Now, we have agentic AI that can run a live feed through an API that not only translates the words, but also flags the tone and historical context. It can tell you, hey, this Iranian official is using a specific religious metaphor from the 8th century that usually precedes a military escalation. It is moving from translation to interpretation.
That is the high-protein information we talked about in episode 553, the SITREP method. It is about extracting the meaning, not just the text. But Herman, let us look at the structure again. If you were building the ultimate dashboard for this conflict right now, what are the 5 columns you have to have?
Okay, if I am in a high-level monitoring room, here is my setup. Column 1 is official state comms. That is the Iranian Foreign Ministry, the Israeli Prime Minister's office, and the White House. This tells you the official narrative and the red lines they want the world to see.
Column 2.
Native language state media. This is Press TV in Farsi, IRNA, and on the Israeli side, the Hebrew news sites like Ynet or Channel 12. This is where you spot the dissonance Daniel mentioned. You compare column 1 to column 2 to see who they are lying to and what they are preparing their own people for.
I love that. Column 3.
The geopolitical block feed. For this conflict, it would be the Abraham Accords countries versus the axis of resistance. What is the UAE saying? What is Jordan saying? Their reactions often tell you more about the success of an operation than the combatants themselves. If Jordan is quiet, it means one thing. If they are condemning both sides, it means another.
Column 4.
The technical OSINT. These are the guys who track satellite imagery, ADS-B flight paths, and maritime data. If you see 5 Iranian cargo planes landing in Damascus, you do not need a news report to tell you a shipment arrived. The data is right there. This is the ground truth that propaganda cannot touch.
And column 5.
The local ground feed. This is a curated list of people living in the specific flashpoints. In our case, that would be people in Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Haifa, but also people in Isfahan or Tehran. When the power goes out in a specific neighborhood in Iran, those are the people who will report it first. It is the raw human experience before it gets processed by the media machine.
It is a comprehensive way to look at it, but it also sounds like a full-time job. For the average person who just wants to stay informed without losing their mind, is there a way to simplify this?
Honestly, the best way is to find 1 or 2 people who are already doing this work and follow their curated lists. But the most important takeaway for anyone is to always be aware of the language gap. If you are reading a translation, ask yourself what was lost. Authoritarian regimes thrive on the fact that the West mostly speaks English and they do not. They play in that gap.
That is a really sharp point. It is a form of asymmetric information warfare. They can read our debates in the New York Times or on X perfectly fine. They know exactly what our internal divisions are, but we struggle to read their internal debates because of the language and cultural barrier.
They are transparent to us, but we are opaque to them. Or rather, they are opaque to us. We are an open book. That is why a conservative, pro-American perspective is so important here. We have to recognize that these are not just different opinions. These are strategic information operations designed to exploit our openness. We need to be as rigorous in our monitoring as they are in their messaging.
Right. And as people who live here in Jerusalem, we see the consequences of that every day. When a regime says death to Israel in Farsi, we should probably believe them, even if their English spokesperson is talking about regional stability and de-escalation.
Believe people when they tell you who they are in their own language. That is the golden rule of geopolitical monitoring.
So, looking forward, how do you think this evolves? As AI gets better at spotting these discrepancies, do you think regimes will get better at hiding them? Or will the gap just become more obvious?
I think we are entering an era of deep fake rhetoric. We are already seeing AI-generated news anchors in some of these countries. Soon, they will be able to tailor their messaging not just to a language, but to specific demographics in the West using hyper-targeted AI personas. They could send one message to a conservative in Texas and a completely different one to a student in California, all using the same event as a backdrop.
That is a terrifying prospect for the signal-to-noise ratio. It makes the need for a structured, analytical approach even more vital. You cannot just follow the algorithm. You have to build your own dashboard, like Daniel is doing. You have to be the architect of your own information intake.
And you have to be willing to look at the raw data. That is why I love the OSINT community. They do not care about the narrative, they care about the tail numbers on the planes and the heat signatures on the satellites. That is the high-protein stuff that survives the propaganda filter.
I think that is a great place to start wrapping this up. We have covered the linguistic dissonance, the structure of professional monitoring rooms, and the importance of looking at blocks rather than just borders. Daniel, thanks for that prompt. It is a perfect example of why we do this show. Taking a practical problem like building a dashboard and peeling back the layers to see the geopolitical machinery underneath.
It really is. And for everyone listening, if you want to dive deeper into how we think about these things, check out myweirdprompts.com. You can search our entire archive of over 900 episodes. If you are interested in the intelligence side of things, those episodes we mentioned, 494 on diplomatic cables and 867 on the democracy dashboard are great places to start.
And hey, if you're finding value in these discussions, please take a second to leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other people who are looking for this kind of deep dive content find the show. We are not just talking about the news, we are trying to understand the systems behind it.
We really appreciate the support. It is what keeps us going, even when the sirens are a bit distracting.
Definitely. We will keep an eye on Daniel's dashboard and let you know if we spot any more of those linguistic glitches. It is a fascinating window into how the world actually works.
Stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay safe out there.
Thanks for listening to My Weird Prompts. We will be back with another one soon. You can find us at myweirdprompts.com and on Spotify.
Until next time, this has been the Poppleberry Brothers.
Bye for now.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show.